When I arrived at Fort Lewis, I thought basic training was behind me. Man, I was wrong. So within minutes of reaching the company area, young specialists, most of them ranger tabbed, they were all up in our faces, screaming, correcting, and looking for reasons just to smoke us. If we stood wrong, it was game on. If we looked at them wrong, it was game on. If we even breathed wrong, it was game on. I thought this was just the Army being the Army, and that's just the way it was. What I didn't realize at the time was that Fort Lewis wasn't trying to break me, it was trying to build me. Let's get into it. Every mission has a beginning, and every journey has a purpose. This is Zeroed In. All right, so when I arrived at Fort Lewis, Washington, somewhere towards the end of January 1991, I reported to the post reception station. There were quite a us new privates there, quite a few of us. We were all straight out of basic training and or airborne school. We spent about a week there in processing and getting ready to be shipped to our new units. Um, while there, a few of us, we hit it off pretty good. We hung out together, including going on a couple of MWR functioned ski trips to a couple of the mountains in Washington. At the time, I mean, it was great to meet others in the same boat as me, just new to the Army and waiting to go to our new unit. So it was kind of cool. We finally got our orders to our unit. First unit was Alpha Company 347 Infantry. It was in the 9th Infantry Division. When we got there, the unit had just deployed to the Middle East, just a week prior to Desert Storm. We integrated with the rear detachment personnel, and we were assigned temporary platoons and barracks, which the barracks ended up becoming permanent for us. A lot of the specialists and the junior NCOs, they were new there as well. However, a lot of them came from just down the street over from 275 or, 2nd Ranger Battalion. Just about all of them had Ranger tabs, combat jump wings from Panama from a year earlier. And then they definitely came with relentless attitudes. So they welcomed us new privates with open arms, treated us pretty well. No, I'm just kidding. That wasn't even remotely close to the relationship we had with them, at least at first. Most of them were kicked out, or in other words, RFS, released for standards, due to hazing and other violations from over there at 275. So, we had them mentoring us right off the bat. So that's who we got to meet first, right out the gate, as soon as we got to the unit. Our first day, it was a wear out session. If we didn't stand a parade rest for any of the specialists while they were talking to us, it was game on. Any exercise you can think of, we did it. If we looked at them without permission, it was game on. As they were showing us where our rooms were at the barracks, that's when the fun really kind of kicked off, where it began. With all our military gear in the duffel bags that we were issued, our civilian bags, with all our personal items, we basically got from the company area to the barracks without walking. It was more of like 3 to 5 second rushes, bear crawls, low crawls, high crawls, all sorts of exercises, using our luggage to wear us out and to establish like the new private's standards. This is how you will conform to anybody who outranks you, which was everybody. So I could see why these guys were released from 275 for hazing, but in the grand scheme of things, it was actually kind of fun, seriously. Since that was what I was exposed to during basic training in AIT, I figured this was just more of an extension of what the Army was, of the Army standard. This was the Army life per se. So I just kind of got used to it. It was no big deal. When we finally got to the barracks, each room had a space for 3 guys, each having their own bed and its own wall locker. Each 3-person room had a shared bathroom. So just in basic training, the rooms, they were expected to be set up and to an established standard. With the linen, the wall lockers, the foot displays. No civilian linen was able to be used at all. Only military issue. I think we had linen issues either Monday or Tuesday mornings, drop off and pick up. So no civilian linen could be used during those days. We made our bunks every day with the 45-degree hospital corners, laundry bags tied off to the end of the beds or under the bunks, just like they did in basic training. All our military gear, it was to be set inside the wall locker according to certain standards, as indicated by like a pictograph that was already taped up inside the wall locker. So, in many ways, this was just an extension of basic training, but it actually came with freedom after work hours and on the weekends. So just as long as you didn't have CQ, charge a quarter duty, which means like there was 24-hour duty. So when the end of the duty day, somebody was always there at night throughout the entire night, usually a non-commissioned officer with a young private. So in that way, the private, they would always be the one that ran but one of the other of like a board, some of the board junior leaders who like to play reindeer games for the hell of it, just smoke the hell out of out of the privates. So just because they could. So you get a bunch of specialists that are unsupervised. That's what happens when all the new privates come in. They like to take advantage of that time. So during the first few weeks, life was pretty hectic. Between learning the expectations of my leaders, learning the hard way through others' foolish actions, like everybody pays, so one guy messes up, everybody pays. Just mass punishment. It's kind of like the life we lived. And adjusting to the new training techniques. Until the personnel that deployed with the unit before we arrived, we were basically led by specialists and young NCOs who had just free reign to break us in. However, despite kind of the pain that we endured, they did ensure that we were learning our jobs by focusing on small unit tactics, both individually and collectively. So we kind of got used to it. So days were like pretty painful, but they at least took the time to help mentor us on our job sets and what we should actually be doing in the Army versus just that initial, just what we learned in basic training was just the basic soldier skills. Now we just kind of took it to a new level. So after about 4 weeks, the deployed personnel, they returned back to the unit. They had been attached to an aviation unit for security. At least that's what we were told. That's while they were over in the Middle East. We were assigned to new platoons when everybody got back, new squad leaders, a new platoon sergeant. The NCOs who were in those positions, they were pretty cool with us, the new guys. So they were hard, but they were pretty fair with us. So we expected them to be just as hard as like when we first got there with all the specialists and young NCOs that recently came from Second Ranger Battalion, but the NCOs that just came back from war, they were pretty cool with us. So that was pretty neat. Unfortunately, I was assigned to a squad where my squad leader was a bit overweight, and he had his voice. It sounded like he had just got kicked in the nether regions, right down in the junk. So anytime he spoke, it was like nails down a chalkboard. It was just horrible. Like nobody could stand his voice. It was annoying. We in the squad, we kind of found out pretty quick that he wasn't much of a PT stud or an expert infantry tactician. or anything like that. He came from being in a tanker company in Germany for a few years to being our squad leader at Fort Lewis in a light infantry company. So to kind of put things into perspective, we were on a battalion training exercise in Yakima, Washington. So if you're not geographically savvy with the state of Washington, on the left side, closer towards the Pacific, it's green, it's beautiful. But if you go east to the right side of the state, there's a lot of desert. So Yakima is out there towards Spokane. It's a lot of desert area. So anyway, our squad, we were tasked with setting up the company assembly area after a training mission one evening. And this means our job was to scout out an area large enough to accommodate 3 platoons and a company talk. So very large, well over 100 people in that company. So our job as a squad was to go out, recon, find something suitable that we can set up, and then lead the entire company in once they arrive. So what's messed up is we ended up being the last ones there because our squad leader, he couldn't navigate at all. Anytime any one of us tried to offer up any assistance, his response was, "I got this," but in like that, that high pitched, like annoying voice, like, "I got this," and the guy would just continuously just scream at us, "I got this." But we knew. I mean, it was so many hours. We were supposed to. There was a no later than time that the company was going to be there, but we were way past that time. And by the time we got there, the rest of us knew nothing was good. Nothing good was about to come out of this. When we finally got there, the first sergeant, he pulled our squad aside and he let the squad leader know that that was the last time, as long as he was there, that our squad would ever lead anything in the company again. Of course, the rest of us, we were pissed off. I mean, because we tried to help him out. He just didn't want to listen to us privates, but he didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear it from the privates. I told myself from that point on, I would never allow myself or allow my competence in infantry tactics to be that substandard as my squad leaders was. It was shameful and it was embarrassing. That moment, it taught me that leadership failure doesn't just affect the leader, it punishes everybody in the squad. Learn from others' mistakes is what I say. It's always better. You can learn from yours, but if you can learn from others to save yourself the pain, that goes a long way. So that's one of the things that in the Army that you try to do is there would always be that one guinea pig, and you want to learn, what not to do based off of their actions, especially when it was, just something absolutely negative. So training. So when we trained locally, we'd go to a place called South Rainier Training Area. Yes, it was probably named after Mount Rainier, or I would imagine it was. Speaking of that, I remember when we did PT in the mornings, and we ran on the streets of Fort Lewis, you could see Mount Rainier in the distance, like as the sun was coming up. It was absolutely beautiful. Although it was pretty far away, it looked as though you could just reach out and touch it. But it was an awesome sight to see every single morning as we ran and did PT. So anyway, South Rainier Training Area, it was a natural rainforest. Even if it didn't rain for a month on Fort Lewis, like on the installation itself, the training area was just perpetually soaked. We'd go out there and train on ambushes, raids, movement to contact drills, and such. And as soon as you lay in the prone, even just for a few seconds, your uniform would be soaked. It seemed like every time we spent a week or two in the woods, the first day would just downpour, adding just to the misery that we would experience for the next couple of weeks. I mean, the moment you walked out there in that rainforest, you were just done for. Everything was soaked. You couldn't pack enough socks. I mean, because your feet were constantly wet. That's just the way the life was in training in the woods in Fort Lewis. So, PT. I became really good at PT. As I said in episode 2, I excelled at push-ups and sit-ups, but this time my running and overall cardio, it improved pretty significantly. My first position in the platoon was a radio telephone operator, RTO, for the platoon leader. Um, Usually the lieutenant, he selects a physically capable and pretty decent multitasker to become the RTO. I don't know why he selected me at the time. Anyway, so no, I'm just kidding. Our platoon leader, he was fresh out of West Point, and he was a physical stud. He played college ball, I believe. He would, we would go running in the morning on PT runs around Gray Army Airfield, which was right next to our company. So, like right in the middle of Fort Lewis, like proper, like the containment area, like where all the major units and stuff were. You had, the big airfield, and then like all the units were around it. So it was about 5 or 6 miles around. That's where I kind of learned to keep up with the deer, or you'd pay the price at the end of the run. So when I say the deer, like for those that don't know, um, those guys that could just run like sub 6 minute miles, and um, your job was to try and keep up with them. If you fell back, I mean, you just paid the price at the end once everybody got back. So PT was a huge focus towards not only just building your competence, but your confidence in your overall job position. So, one of the things in the infantry was if you could PT, if you were a PT stud, you were looked at pretty highly regarded. So you always wanted to be able to excel and do better. So if you're running, like as we were running around that airfield, um, at least from my perspective, if there was somebody in front of me, my job or what my mindset was, I got to pass that next guy in front of me. And then as soon as I pass them, I'm now shooting for the next guy. So that's just what kept me going, kept my drive going, and made me a better runner. So that lieutenant, he was definitely responsible for my improved running capabilities. Anyway, I learned a ton from him, and being able to see how operations are, how they're handled, not only at the platoon level, but also at the company level by, as the RTO, relaying information back and forth between the commander, the lieutenant, other platoons, and other companies. That was more like the macro vision that I needed as I learned my role later in the Army. So after my stint as an RTO, and after I kind of got to learn a lot of the kind of macro level stuff, but also the intricacies of how the radio operations and not just the radio itself, but like the encryption and decryption methods, and how to actually like report on the radio utilizing the SOI, which was, I believe it was like the standardized operating index or something like that, that had all the frequencies, the challenge of passwords, and it was the old school encryption. It was like manual encryption. So somebody would give you a keyword, you'd have to look up the keyword, and then that keyword would lead to another piece. It was just it was before all these algorithms are out now. I mean, you had to do everything manually. So it was kind of cool to kind of look back on then to understand like how encryption and decryption worked back then. So when you did everything manually. So after becoming an RTO, or after I was kind of done with my stint as an RTO, I became a SAW gunner, um, the squad automatic weapon. This is the person who has the most firepower in a squad. It's the first level machine gun, per se. It's, like I said, known as the squad automatic weapon. It fires the same round as an M16 or an M4, but at a very much higher rate. And it comes with two separate barrels. So when one gets too hot, after putting so many rounds through it, you can take that off and then change it out with the next one. While that one cools down, now you're picking up and firing out of the new barrel and whatnot. So, but you own most of the firepower inside of that squad. So being a SAW gunner, it was awesome. Having the ability to provide coverage for my squad and others, and allow them the ability to move. while I kept the enemy's head down. It was a great learning experience. I remember we were assaulting this one target, um, and it had concertina wire all around it, which we had to get through to reach the target building. So the team I was on, we were responsible for establishing the breach to allow forces to get to the building. I had two jobs at the breach point. One was to lay down fire on the target while my team leader was cutting the wire on his back using wire cutters. And then my second job was once if the wire wasn't actually to be like fully cut and we needed to get over, so I would also be the guy that lays down on top of the wire, face down. So like my stomach is on the wire, my back's up, and while others run across my back to get through the obstacle on their way to the building. So if as because everything is timely. So as fires shift and as time, progresses, as maneuver forces come down and they need to get through that choke point, if we fail at our job, guess what? The private lays across the wire. So in those days, we didn't have a Skedco or matting to lay over the wire. It was just the private's job. Hey, get on the wire, or you were thrown onto the wire and everybody comes running across your back. And then at the end, like, as the last man's coming through, he'll reach down if he's nice enough. That's even if he remembers, and he's like now pulling you off the wire, and the wire is all caught up in your uniform. So now you're dragging it. I mean, it wasn't it. It was quite an experience. I'll just say that. So um, we trained on that same scenario later on, and this time there were observer controllers there. Um, these are just independent people that are not in the fight. So for those that weren't in the military, these are they like the assessors. They look at different aspects of the battlefield and different units. At a company level or even at a platoon level, they're going to look at certain leadership positions or certain roles, and then kind of assess like how they're doing. So that way, once you get done with the mission, they'll give you feedback on what this unit may not have done correctly, what was their intent behind what they were supposed to do, what they did, and what they could have done better. But anyway, we had OCs there, like I said, observer controllers, and they would assess casualties. So the OC assessed as we were doing the breach. Once again, my team leader was down there cutting wire, and just as he got down there, they assessed my team leader as a casualty. So what does that mean? So that left me to take over the position. So I had to grab the wire cutters from him. I laid on my back and started cutting away at the wire. And the next thing I know, bullets were just pinging all around me, hitting the wire just a few inches from my body and from my head. But the adrenaline rush that I was feeling at the time, um, it came over me so great that the only one thing I was concentrating on was just not letting the platoon down and getting that wire obstacle open, so everybody else could move through and get to the target to be able to complete the mission. So those are fun times, and these are just two examples. Um, I could go on and on for days on some of the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we did, and some of the unorthodox style of getting through some of the obstacles that we did that were kind of fun. So being at Fort Lewis during this time frame um, was awesome in retrospect. So this was the start of the grunge era in music, and the home of that genre was in Seattle. So right there where I was stationed at during that time. So um, you know, it's said that you really don't appreciate um, something until after it's gone, and that holds true for this era of music. I remember my team leader, same one that was breaching the wire with, he came into our barracks room one time with a mixtape of music from various artists and bands from around Seattle. Um, it consisted of Pearl Jam's new release of 10, Soundgarden's Louder Than Love album, Bad Motorfinger, Nirvana's Bleach and Nevermind albums, Temple of the Dog, Mother Love Bone, amongst others. Now, you got to figure, I grew up in the 80s listening to 80s metal, and I didn't think there was ever going to be any other music that I'd like other than that. However, this music, it just kind of had like a different vibe to it. So, um, in our off time, a few of us used to go into downtown Seattle. We'd go there quite a bit. I think it was maybe like a 40-minute drive, if that, from Fort Lewis to Seattle. So we'd go down there quite a bit, specifically in Pioneer Square. That's where most of the bands played and or started out. Um, every bar in Pioneer Square always had a live band playing. And if you haven't been there, the bars they're long, so it's not like kind of walking into what you would see like a big bar today. They were just like long. They were side by side, so they were like old buildings, and you'd walk in the front door, and the bar would be on the right or on the left, and it would just be one long thing. So you'd see bar stools and then some, high tabletops, whatnot, and then in the back there was a stage. So one night we paid for a single cover charge that allowed us to get into 7 bars by showing a wristband. So they did like these specials would be like a 7 and 7. So you pay a $7 cover charge, you get a wristband, and then if those 7 bars were on the list, you already paid your cover. So all you got to do is go show the bouncer your wristband, and you'd walk in. Um, so as the night went on, we went on to one of the bars on the list that was on the prepaid list, and the bouncer they asked for like an additional $10. So we thought we were being scammed since this bar was on the list. He said there was a band playing, and we were like, yeah, well, there's a band playing in every other bar. So, and he said, well, you don't get to see this one unless we pay the extra $10. So we did. We get in there, one band, they were wrapping up on the stage because you could see the lights went dark, and you could see bodies moving around the stage, moving in and around. And about 15 minutes later, we were just kind of hanging out. We could see movement on the stage as the lights were still dark. And the next thing you know, like I hear the opening riff to Sea of Sorrow from Alice in Chains. Because their facelift album was already out. And we're just like, whoa. Then, like a single white light, like shone down. It just shone right down on Lane Staley's face, showing his long braided beard. He had like one of those long goatee beards, braided off, and wearing his signature dark sunglasses and no shirt. That was just awesome. Just awesome times to be in. So, throughout the time I was there, like I said, during those times, I mean, those bands were playing all over. So we saw Alice in Chains that night in an intimate, kind of like intimate setting in that bar. We saw Pearl Jam a few times over at Gasworks Park. If anybody's familiar with Seattle, you'd know that. Um, Nirvana was playing in a nightclub one night. Went in there and we saw them. So it was a really good time to be stationed out there during that time. So um, there was a nightclub on base called the Madigan Club. The Madigan Club was attached to the hospital on base, the Madigan Hospital. However, people would come from off post to the club because it was like the place to be. Even though Fort Lewis, even during that time, was considered a closed post. When I say closed, like there was a gate there, gate guards and MPs who ran the gates. Not like today where there's contractors, but MPs were running the gates. You had to show an ID to get in. So not all bases were like that back then, but Fort Lewis was. But people would come on just because that was a happening place to be. So as young soldiers, we'd go out, we'd get our partying on at the barracks beforehand, and then head to the club like later on that night or later on at night. I remember one night we were walking in, and there was a girl in front of me because there's a long line to get in. So we were walking through the threshold of the door, and there was a girl in front of me. And as we were walking through the door, and the girl turned around and slapped me right in the face. I was like, what the hell? So I had no idea why. My roommate, who was behind me at the time, he asked me what I did. And I'm like, dude, I didn't do anything. Like, I have no idea. So I don't know. We went on about our business, walked in there. And shortly after that, man, some dude, he walked up to me and just pow, like punched me right in the nose. Um, I was like, what the hell? Needless to say, the fight was on and we ended up getting kicked out that night. So, had no idea what was going on. The next morning, we're in our barracks room and I woke up with a sore nose, dark circles underneath my eyes. Um, my roommate, like I woke up and I remember saying, oh my God, my nose is killing me. And my roommate, he apologized to me. And I asked, like, why? Like, why are you apologizing to me? He said, well, as we were walking into the club, he had leaned like around me and squeezed the girl's behind, who was in front of me. So now I understand why she had slapped me. And then her boyfriend later on came up and just straight up punched me in the nose. So I had no idea any of my roommate had done any of that. So buddy, I guess, is only half the word in that sense. But we had a good laugh after a while. That was the first time I had got my nose broken. So it was pretty funny. So there were many more stories of shenanigans that we get into, and we may talk about those later, maybe some of the other episodes, or once we get through a lot of these episodes, I want to start bringing people on that were in different periods of my life to be able to discuss some of these things. So we may learn some new perspectives from their lenses after you've heard through mine. So anyway, so Fort Lewis, it was actually a really, really beautiful place to be stationed at. We traveled to Mount Rainier a few times, Vancouver, British Columbia. We went there a lot. I believe there was a little town on the way there, just over the border called White Rock. We'd always stop in there, grab some drinks, and then head on to Vancouver. Vancouver was awesome. And then we also went skiing a lot. Stevens Pass, Snoqualmie Pass, and we went whitewater rafting. That was fun, but it was freezing cold. That water running down off of Mount Rainier and the other mountains, it was cold. But if you ever want to do anything outdoors, like that was the place to be at, or the place to be stationed. It was awesome. So, kind of back to some of the Army training. So, as I said before, I was a SAW gunner. This weapon, it came with a pretty large sling because it was much heavier than your standard rifle. My team leader, he used to say, slings are for the weak. And he wouldn't allow me to attach it to the weapon system at all. Like I was like the only guy. He set out for a purpose. I was the only guy who couldn't carry my SAW with a sling in our platoon, or probably in some of the other platoons. Our unit, we set out on a 100-mile foot march. Like I said, you're in the infantry, you're walking everywhere. So we set out on a 100-mile foot march. We did it 25 miles a day for 4 days. That was pretty rough. So for the entire 100 miles, my team leader not only refused to allow me to use a sling, but he also insisted that I continue to build my body using the weapon as a curl bar as we marched. So, you got to figure, as I'm holding my weapon system, now he's got me curling this thing as I walk. So, you know, he and I had a pretty good relationship. I mean, we laughed a lot, but I understood his intent. Like he just wanted to make. He was one of those guys coming from 275. He jumped into Panama too, but he saw my potential, so he was doing everything he could to kind of build my mind and body. So, but one thing I can be proud to say is that I was the only SAW gunner in the company who completed the entire foot march without without one, wearing the sling, or two, passing the weapon off to anybody. So all your SAW gunners, what they would do is their leaders would be like, "Oh, hey, let's share the pain." And what they would do is, so instead of that one person, that SAW gunner, being overwhelmed for the entire 100 miles, what they would do is pass off that weapon system to people. And my team leader told me, he's like, "Hey, anybody asks to take that weapon from you, absolutely not. You don't allow it. This is yours. So you were assigned this. That's your job. You're carrying it the entire way." So I was like, "All right, that's it." So it may seem like a small feat, but it shifted my mindset to a place basically where I could accomplish anything physically and mentally, or at least that marked the start of the process. So um, in April of '92, our unit, we underwent EIB training and testing. So that's called the Expert Infantryman's Badge. Um, EIB, that is the acronym for it. It consists of many individual tasks, such as calling for fire, like calling, getting on the radio and calling mortars to be able to call in for fire, or artillery. Precise, like hand grenade throwing and tossing, radio operations, encrypting and decrypting messages, as well as putting like various weapon systems together, um, in and out of operation, land navigation, how to read a map, stuff like that. So just to name a few. All in all, and then at the end of the testing, that week of testing, or of training and then testing, I think testing was like 2 days, maybe 3 days. Um, all of this culminated in a 12-mile foot march. That was for time. Followed immediately. So as soon as you come across the finish line, um, after doing the 12-mile foot march with weight on your back and with your rucksack and everything, you immediately went into a weapons disassembly and then assembly. So for your own weapon that you were carrying. So if you were carrying a saw, you did a weapons disassembly and then assembly and then functions check. So in EIB, I believe there was a total of like 30 stations with various tasks. So during testing, if you failed more than 2 tasks, you were dropped from the competition and had to wait until like the following year to try again. So as a young new guy, I saw people going through for upwards of like their 7th time. Like these are seasoned people who've been in the Army, in the infantry for a long time. And some of them, this was like their 7th time trying for it. So to be able to have the distinction of wearing that badge. So I thought to myself, like, how the hell am I going to pass this as a brand new private when more seasoned people, who have been trying many, many times, they've been struggling. So this was my first time, my first attempt even seeing the process, let alone trying to pass it. So, like I said, this is my first time going through it. And as it turned out, like I practiced and studied my ass off so much. And a lot of that credit was going to my team leader who pushed me at the time. I passed all of my individual tasks on the first attempt. That was like what they used to call true blue. Um, if you passed all your individual tasks like prior to the foot march, you were true blue going through. So what last thing, or the other option was like either you failed or there was like this other option where you were what they call blade running. Um, like I said, you could miss up to 2 tasks, but if you missed 3, like you were done. So there were a lot of guys that would miss 2 tasks, but could still go on and complete everything. They just had to complete the 12-mile foot march. So you didn't want to go into the 12-mile or blade running. That was just not what you want to do. So um, the only thing separating me from earning my EIB was that 12-mile foot march to take place at the end of the week. So once we started off that day on the foot march, we had 3 hours to complete it over a designated course. It was all on roads, whether it be paved road or dirt roads, gravel roads, stuff like that. It was all throughout the training areas. And I immediately took off at a quick pace, pretty much maintained it throughout. And at about mile 8, my team leader had told me, because he had showed up, he had already gotten, he had a CIB. I think he might have had his EIB, but I know that back then if you had your CIB, you didn't have to, your combat infantryman's badge, you didn't even have to go through EIB. At least that's the way it was. But anyway, so he didn't like do the 12-mile with me, but he ended up showing up and seeing me at about the 8-mile marker. And he told me I was so far behind schedule that I needed to pick up the pace or I was going to fail. And I was like, so I just took off running for the last 4 miles to the finish line. So if you think of it like this, you couldn't wear watches. They made everybody take them off prior to going. Back then, I don't know if you can wear them today, but back then you couldn't wear a watch. So you basically had to, like, through your own process of understanding like how fast you can move. So you got to figure 12 miles, and you had 3 hours to go. So as an experienced infantryman, you should know, that obviously the minimum pace you had to move was 4 miles an hour. So, but me, I was moving at a pretty good clip. But from what he told me, he was like, dude, you are so far behind right now. So, like I said, I just took off running for like the last 4 miles. I had no idea what my time was. So, based off of my previous pace, I thought I was okay. So, my team leader at that point, like, he had me so stressed, there was no way I was going to repeat the 12-mile the next day. So if you didn't pass that 12-miler, you were going right back out the next day and doing it. So, and that's as long as you weren't blade running. So if you had any other previous failures, as long as you didn't have 2 previous failures, I mean, you'd have to do it again. But best case scenario, you want to get it knocked out the first time, because I've seen guys over the years having to do it the very next day. I've also seen EIBs where you run it back to back. So if you didn't make the 12 miles in 3 hours, guess what? You are now going back out to do it again after like maybe a 30-minute rest. I've seen that before. That's horrific. So I definitely wasn't going to be that guy that was going to, do the 12-mile again the next day. When I crossed the finish line, there was a large, like, one of those long jeans type, or, what is it, Lotus or Loris timing, big, big clocks there, digital clocks, for everybody to see. And when I crossed the line, it was at 1 hour and 52 minutes. You got to figure, we had 3 hours to do this. I crossed that line at 1 hour and 52. I looked at that time, I was like, what? So I still had another 1 hour and 7 minutes to spare. So when my team leader met me at the finish line, he had the biggest smile on his face, just giggling, because I had accomplished what a lot of people had set out to gain and never get to behold. But because, once again, I mean, he had pushed me beyond my comfort zone to excel. So he had basically more or less that, for lack of a better term, that shit-eating grin. So, but anyway, it was a huge relief finishing that EIB and getting that pinned. So first time going through, that's a huge accomplishment for a private. In early July of '92, I think it was early July, our unit, we were being disbanded and reestablished it to Fort Polk, Louisiana, to head down, to head up the new Joint Readiness Training Center, JRTC. Everyone in the unit was either moving to Louisiana or being reassigned somewhere else in the country. So orders came down for me, and I was heading to Alaska. So basically, I was going from being perpetually soaking wet in training to looking forward to freezing in the Arctic. So yeah, nice. Welcome to the Army, especially the infantry, where you train and sleep outside in any condition whatsoever. So in the next few months, I would face challenges that would reinforce my physical and mental toughness, and then I would be presented with a pivotal decision point that would change my outlook on the rest of my Army life. So looking back, just kind of in retrospect, Fort Lewis, it didn't feel significant at the time. It was just training, just work, just another duty station. But those years, they shaped everything after. Um, I learned the cost of poor leadership and what that looked like. And I learned that confidence, it's not given, it's built under weight and pressure. Um, I left Fort Lewis stronger than I arrived, not because of where I went next, but because of who I'd already become. So until the next episode, stay aware, stay accountable, stay zeroed in.